name is Cockerham. I chair the Sierra Club State Chapter's Environmental Justice Committee. I will talk a little bit about green jobs and reduced energy bills, especially for low-income people by energy efficiency savings. Talk a little bit about toxic release in inner-city Nashville, and some work we're starting with Mayan villages around the Felipe Peria Puerto area of the Yucatan. Our first speaker in the series today is Celeste Agan, who is LCSW and a doctoral candidate here at UT Knoxville. She's going to talk generally about environmental toxins and children, and then the specific problems of a community she's working with in Birmingham, Alabama, that suffers from industrial chemical contamination. Then Barb Kilbourne from TSU and Meharry, who's also a member of the Sierra Club Tennessee Environmental Education Committee. And then myself and Ramesh Kassetti will follow up. Ramesh is the co-founder and vice president of Fortuna Pix, which is working with us to make some environmental education videos. And he's also a member of the Tennessee Chapter Environmental Education Committee. Celeste.
So we have 15 minutes apiece, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Barb.
Good afternoon. My name is Celeste Agan. As Cliff had told you, I am a student here at the University of Tennessee. I am working with Dr. Mary Rogge as well as Dr. Lisa Mason on the development of a new field called environmental social work. And environmental social work is being established now. There's kind of a movement throughout the country to work on the front lines, to help direct service providers and social workers who do macro type work in the policy related fields to actually work on establishing environmentalism as a priority. And so a part of that will be an interest in healthy homes. We want to make sure that our homes are healthy, environments indoors and out of doors are healthy for our children, so as to ensure their health and well-being. So that's why I'm here at the University of Tennessee. What got me here was actually my interest in some work in the Birmingham area, which I'll talk about in a minute. But as a social worker, we look at policy. We're interested in telling the stories of the people that we see each and every day to policymakers and decision makers so that they know how practices and laws are truly affecting the people who they are designed to help. And so naturally, environmentalism should be a priority for all of us. So right now I'm working with Dr. Rogge on an article regarding environmental toxins. And so we're trying to bring to light the issue of, I believe some of us will be speaking later about asthma. Asthma is an issue, continues to be an increasing issue for children. It's actually increased. There's a report that came out this year by the EPA called America's Children and the Environment. And in that report it states explicitly that asthma has increased, childhood cancer has increased, as well as preterm births, reproductive issues. So, we have faith in our healthcare system that these things are being taken care of, but there are other factors, such as the environment and environmental toxins, that can be affecting these outcomes for children and for adults. So, recently I went to Washington, D.C., courtesy of the Sierra Club, in order to speak about how air pollution is affecting the people on the front lines, the people who are near industries. And that was industries in the North Birmingham area in Alabama. And so the Sierra Club is working to fight a law. It's an exception called the SSM rule. There's actually an exception for industries that allows them to emit excessive air pollution at startup, shut down, and when they malfunction. And so in August, I went to Washington, D.C. to talk about how air pollutants are affecting the people in North Birmingham. I went with Mr. Powell, who's the president of an organization I work with there, called People Against Neighborhood Industrial Contamination. And so in that group that's been established for about a year, we are working to get the community more involved in contamination that's been going on for about 100 years in that area. And so in that process, we've seen a lot of interesting things. So the area is listed under the Superfund mandate, but it's not been placed on the national priorities list yet, which would allocate funding and resources. Right now, the Environmental Protection Agency is working closely with the industries that are causing contamination to try to get them to pay for the cleanups. And so one thing that's not really noticed is when an area is contaminated and it's known to be contaminated, you kind of assume that, okay, EPA knows about this situation, so EPA is going to make sure it's all cleaned up. And ideally, in an ideal world, that's what would happen. Unfortunately, that's not always what happens, and they negotiate, and it can take years and years and years of litigation before areas get cleaned up. Right now in North Birmingham, where there are 4 schools, one that's been shut down, there are issues with continued contamination. So there's plants there that are still operating. So the EPA is saying the area is contaminated. We're not giving you the resources yet. We're negotiating with the industries, and we're silencing your voice. And they do this out of frustration. I think the Environmental Protection Agency, there's a lot of good people there with big hearts, but they don't have the funding, and sometimes because they don't have the funding that they need to do everything they want, they have to work with industries to try to get that money. And so that creates a dynamic that's really not often discussed in these contaminated areas. And in particular, area of interest of mine is one, schools. I care a lot about what happens in the schools. And so I want to make sure that children are protected. So in turn, I've been reading up on a thing called risk assessments. So risk assessments are done in contaminated communities to evaluate risk. What contaminants are there? Are people being exposed? And is it causing harm? And so this is a very difficult link and a heck of a process to try to figure out. So sometimes what happens in these risk assessments, they're based on a lot of computer models and hazard indices that actually assume that all chemicals are the same and do not interact in a negative way when in the environment together. And so at Hudson School, which is a school in Collegeville in North Birmingham communities, there were spikes of lead. Can one of you tell me what lead does? Is lead good? No, lead's horrible, and it's horrible for kids. And so, thank you. So it's horrible stuff, but they found spikes of lead in the air 7 times the acceptable rate, as well as manganese, which is also a neurotoxin. So lead's a neurotoxin, manganese is a neurotoxin. They found these together at this school twice back in March of last year. And so we've also noticed on the risk assessments there was a placement limit of 1 in 10,000, which means 1 in 10,000 extra cancer occurrences that occur in the community because of environmental toxins. So 1 in 10,000 extra people dying in a community is considered acceptable. But in the North Birmingham area, the rate is 1.5. So they're saying 1.5 people die. So it's 50% more out of 10,000 than the acceptable limit. it's never acceptable to be over 1 in 10,000, but in this area, is 50% above that. However, the cleanup is kind of at, of course, right now the government shutdown's going on, so everything's at a standstill. EPA is not cleaning up contaminated communities. But besides that, their actions are limited because they're waiting on the industries to do a lot of this work that they oversee to clean up the contamination that they caused. Does anyone see any fundamental issues with that? What's wrong with having people who cause the contamination to be the people responsible for cleaning it up? What do you think?
It is not good because it's like it's like asking somebody else to asking a kid to clean up the room. They're not really gonna clean it up. They're gonna stuff.
Yeah.
They're gonna stuff the clothes under the bed.
That is well said. Excellent. That is, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. They're gonna stuff the clothes up under the bed. So you think about that in terms of environmental toxins, and that stuff is scary. And so I heard, Cliff, you were talking earlier about benzene. So in these communities, 1 out of 25 times the air was monitored, that benzene was found to be above the limit. So 4, 5, 7 times above the acceptable limit. So, and the school was shut down. However, cleanup is still kind of at a standstill because EPA is working with industries. And there's stuffing their clothes up under the bed. And so, you know, we usually have a lot of faith in community participation. The organization I'm with, the community is 94 to 97% African American. And of course, most of the members are African American and really want something done. And we tried to elicit the participation of churches, but another dynamic people kind of lose and don't think about in this process is when congregations begin talking about how contaminated their environment is, where their church is sitting, people really don't want to come to that church anymore or live in the area anymore. So if you're going to church on Sundays and they're talking about, you know, what the EPA has or has not done, what the industries have or have not done, and bringing it into people's awareness, they may not necessarily feel a pride, and may actually in turn feel kind of a stigma related to living in that community. And so there's not a lot of cohesion around this issue in the area, and people are just tired and frustrated and unbelievably and reasonably so. And so, you know, we can make assumptions about why things are working the way they are, but there's a lot of dynamics that go on. And I know there's been a lot of talk in this conference about the executive order 12898 that was actually designed to promote environmental justice. And we have a lot of faith that that executive order would give some backing to efforts to take care of the environmental justice issue. There was a study back in 2007 by Sandra O'Neill, which actually states that there's been a reduction of likelihood of poor, minority, and Native American communities from being placed on the National Priorities List. National Priorities List means resources. So there's actually, since 1994, since this order was signed, there was a reduction in the amount of communities getting the resources that they need to clean up their communities. So while this order was a great thing, and there's a lot of factors involved, it hasn't necessarily been the magic wand that we needed to take care of this large-scale issue. Also, there was a study back in 2004 done by Daly and Layton, which stated that just because a site is really, really contaminated, just because children are being exposed to benzene, lead, manganese, and having to have their soil replaced and schools shut down, does not necessarily mean that EPA is going to come and clean it up. The problem severity is not the leading reason why EPA cleans up according to the study, it's not the leading reason why EPA cleans up contaminated areas. Their study lend-a-lot support to administrative convenience. If they can get into a community, clean it up, and get out, it makes them look really good and justifies their funding. And so the Superfund program looks good when they go in these communities and hurry up and get things done and get out. Or they avoid using Superfund and trust fund or the appropriated funds by using money from the responsible parties who are trying to clean up. There's also, if anyone's interested, there's 2 documentaries related to the community that I'm working in, Deadly Deception 1 and Deadly Deception 2. And we think about media coverage as being a great thing. We want media coverage, we want the news involved, we want everybody to know how contaminated a community is, but that does not fix the problem. It can create awareness, but unless people are aware of the litigation and the subtleties, the nuances involved in what's going on in the community that's preventing cleanup, it's very hard to get things done. But Deadly Deception 1 and 2 was done by a local news reporter who has since, she won a lot of awards at the beginning of this year, and 2 weeks ago they came out with 5 companies that were shown to be responsible for the contamination. One of those 5 companies, 3 of the companies, Walter Energy, Drummond Coal, and Alagasco, were found to be responsible. That was 2 weeks ago. She has since lost her job. So, but she won awards at the beginning of this year. So there's a lot of politics involved, and it's unfortunate that politics and clean air and clean environment cannot all go hand in hand to the point where we're all on the same page. But when you're working with communities, when you're working with toxins, it's a subject that a lot of people do not want to think about because it's subtle, it's complicated, it's frustrating, but it's a worthy fight. And there are people out there who have good intentions. Like I said, there's a lot of great people at the EPA, at the Centers for Disease Control, the other agencies involved. However, we have to push for what we want and help create awareness and make sure that other people know what's going on. And so, giving these stories to the policymakers and the decision makers helps to make things happen. And so, that is my conclusion. Are there any questions about my work, or any comments, any frustrations, concerns, advice? Who wants to give me advice? How do I get the clothes out from under the bed? How do we do that? How do we keep them from cramming clothes under the bed? You got an idea?
Cleaning the room.
Yes. Great.
You gotta have people like
Having somebody else clean it up.
Having someone else, and then you pay them. You pay them when it's all sparkly and clean, right? And make sure the job is done right. So, okay, great. Well, thank you so much for listening.
I personally found the most effective method was allowing my daughter to move to New York City. Barb Kilbourne, thank you very much, Celeste, and we'll come back with the Q&A to talk some more. Barb Kilbourne from TSU and Meharry, and also the State Environmental Education Committee of the Sierra.
And it's a good building because many of the things that I'm looking at are good lead-in to me. We are looking at a taxonomy of illness, and Birmingham kind of ranks at the top of what we call Six City Syndrome. Not only from environmental toxins, but from social toxins as well. It's one of the leaders of male homicide, and so it's interesting. So I come at it from a different point of view. I'm an economist by training, I'm a sociologist by my employment, and I work at a medical center, and I have an undergraduate in geography. So I have a lot of different hats, okay? So this presentation is part of a big project that may be interesting to some of you. It is part of the environmental health, environmental context of health disparities. It was funded by the NIH, and we really have three kind of things. So we want to innovate in terms of using big data. We have a lot, biology uses big data all the time because we have all the biological information about genetics and everything. We are beginning to get the same kind of big data on the environmental context. Like she was talking about the level of benzene, and I was immediately thinking, what day? And so NASA actually is, now taking snapshots of, like on a monthly basis of contamination around the United States. So we're working on that. And then the other project that we're working on is the exposome project, is play on the word chromosome. And so we're building a team of researchers, not necessarily, and some activists actually in here, to develop relational databases so when people want to look at something that they can do public participatory GIS and they can map exactly who has pulled a permit to permit what, where in their community. And we are trying to, this is just for researchers, this is my little nerd part of it, is that we're trying to develop a data portal so that you can go in and pull data on social, built environment, and environmental data at 3 different levels of analysis: county, state, and census tract. And this is to advance research. And then finally, the last thing that we're doing is, can I go to slideshow? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The last thing that we're, kind of doing is trying to say it's all doom and gloom, it's all bad news. What we're trying to do is look for the positive deviance. And in health, which is where I'm working now, that is the places where people should be sick, but they're not. What are those people doing differently? So we're using big data to identify pockets of resilience. Or this could be pockets of places where people have effectively been able to make corporations clean up. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today was 3 kind of empirical generalizations of things that we know to be true. We know that particulate matter pollution is higher in areas that have a higher percentage of people of color. In the case of our study, it's African Americans, and segregation. So in places that are segregated and high concentrations of African Americans, you can bet your Bippy that there's going to be a higher level of particulate matter pollution. We know that from the literature, we know that from all the research that we've done. We've also known that where there's poverty, that there's going to be a higher level of particulate matter pollution. And we also know that particulate matter pollution from both the scientific literature and from our own research is, linked to infant mortality, and to be real, it's post-neonatal infant mortality that particulate matter pollution is most lethal to. Lung cancer mortality and congestive heart failure mortality. For congestive heart failure mortality, you need to have a high heat index and particulate matter pollution. So it plays out a little differently for each of those 3 disease outcomes. Okay, so this is what, I like to do. I like pretty maps. So this is kind of looking at particulate matter pollution. I need a pointer. Particulate matter pollution throughout, the United States. The red are the places where it's highest. So where are we today? We're at the place where it's highest. You can see the swath through Birmingham. And going all the way up to, I believe that is one of the Great Lakes, but I think that's is that Ontario? Help me out.
Where did you get that map from, please?
What?
Where did you get that map from, please?
I made it.
Are you building
Michigan.
I have to ask permission for who funded me, but if you give me an email, I'm pretty sure I'm willing to share.
Thank you.
And, I have this map of particulate matter pollution. My daughter, I didn't make it, actually my daughter made it.
That's amazing.
But, same family, okay? So here we look at racial segregation. It doesn't exactly map it, but racial segregation is the most intense in the southeast, southeast. And then this map is a little bit better. If you look at those orange counties, that shows where racial segregation doesn't necessarily cluster with other counties, but it's there, okay? So this is the map of racial segregation. You can see there's some overlap, but you can't overlay particulate matter pollution directly with racial segregation. But you can definitely see that there would be some overlap, okay? This I actually used for my intro sociology class. And this is where we look at race-specific poverty, poverty on blacks. We can kind of see, if we move this a little to the east, we can kind of see this X a little bit again. And so what I'm saying, if you're African American and you want to make a lot of money, move to Atlanta, because blue is good. Okay, and white poverty. So where do you guys see the concentrations of white poverty in the real Appalachia? And a lot of people here are interested in Appalachia, so this is no surprise to you. Okay, so here are, like I'm a statistician, so here are kind of these relationships. These are Pearson's correlation coefficients that range from 0 to 1. They're all really significant. The biggest one is between racial segregation and particulate matter pollution. That's for a cross-sectional correlation, that 0.31, if you round, is a pretty big correlation. So where you have racially segregated neighborhoods in a county, you're also going to have high particulate matter pollution.
Can you go back to that last one? Can I ask questions?
You can always ask questions. I like questions.
So when you're saying segregation versus black poverty and white poverty, I'm not exactly wrapping my head around how that's getting defined.
Okay. Racial segregation is being defined by a black isolation index that was developed by the Arizona Geocoding Project in 2000 and updated again in 2008. And how they measure that is that the percent of people that could go 24 hours in a day and not have to come into contact with someone of another racial category. Okay? So that is how that is being defined.
Okay.
So it's actually, segregation is easier than isolation, that apparently I thought, but apparently not. And then poverty is, like there's always a poverty level, and using the geolytics data, I used the percent of blacks or whites, non-Hispanic, blacks or whites that were below the poverty level. So we good on that?
Are the two things correlated? Segregation and
I
poverty?
should have shown you that, but, oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't show that one.
That's
because
where I guess I'm coming up against.
In fact, I don't want to go there, but in fact, it's causing a problem in my research that they're so correlated with each
That's
other. I
okay.
can't look at the independent
Thank you.
effects, okay? Okay. Hotspot rates, the end of mortality. So again, what my story that I want to tell today, that I'm allowed to tell because it's already been presented in a public conference, is about infant mortality. So looking at infant mortality for blacks, the same kind of hotspot thing, is you can see that the hotspots are not exactly where the other hotspots are. But again, we hope that there'll be some overlap. Looking at infant mortality, look at infant mortality. Well, somehow they got shuffled here, but
There it is.
no, okay, where's my white infant mortality? It's gone, but okay. We can look at the analyses that we can predict, but again, when you look at white infant mortality, it's going to look a lot like when I showed you the cancer map. So again, it's like where you have cancer, you also have infant mortality, you also have heart disease. There tends to be where, like infant mortality is beginning to be, in my mind, like the canary in the mine from having a sick city. So, where you have high infant mortality, that means you don't have to look too hard to find high rates of neoplasms, high rates of heart disease, and high rates of neurological diseases. Okay, so go on, you go. We can have a conversation.
0.396, 0.373. Why is that leaping out so much higher than the others?
This is because You're talking about this one right here?
Those two boxes.
Because for some reason, poverty interacts with race in a way that for whites, poverty seems to be more toxic in terms of infant mortality than it does for blacks. I was hoping that what you would do would be looking, because this is environmental, I was hoping that you would be looking up at the first row instead of the bottom row, because what we find is once you control for poverty, and that's a statistics thing, you don't have to get it, it's magic, but I want you to compare that 137 to that .050. And I want you to see that particulate matter pollution is much more lethal, and that's a significant difference for African American infants than it is for white infants. And this brings us back to something that Celeste said when they're looking at housing. So what this leads me to, this is like the pilot project. It's should we be looking at why? And my hypothesis is that, you know, that maybe the housing stocks of African Americans is less well insulated, so particulate matter pollution is more likely to come in or out. You know, like, I don't know exactly why. Maybe air conditioning is used less often in the summer, yeah?
Housing racism. I mean, sometimes people won't sell to African Americans in areas that they sell to whites.
And since my level is county level, it could be that actually the particulate matter pollution is more concentrated in a county in the areas where, there's more black poverty. So, because remember, when you're looking at environmental epidemiology, the level of analysis matters. It looks different at the state, then you step it down, it looks different at the county, and then if you step it down, it looks different at the census tract. I usually don't have to talk about segregation in the census tract because census tracts are usually so segregated they're either one or the other in the South. And then you can step it down even further to the block. Okay? Yes?
What does the N mean at the bottom?
How many cases are in my analysis? The N means that there are 873 counties in the United States that have more than 20 infant deaths in the years between 1999 and 2008. Okay? And there are 2,091 counties that have white infant deaths. Yes?
Good question. Is there any statistical data available for immunodeficiencies or anything between white and black that is geared towards infant feeding, for instance, breastfeeding versus that
There's
situation?
not, and that is interesting because like probably both of us know, but probably no one else in the room is familiar with the idea that blacks on average are less likely to breastfeed than whites, but that difference goes away once you control for social class.
Okay.
Once you control for poverty, that difference in breastfeeding behavior goes to nothing. And yes?
The maps that you showed of particulate matter 2.5 levels, and I've seen that was ambient levels in those places.
It was the average between 2006 and 2008.
Okay, but ambient. And so, have you looked at the data for the emission levels, for example, on a map with that kind of detail? Can you pinpoint where industrial smokestacks are located?
We have that.
And then how strict the pollution levels are controlled from those smokestacks, and then correlate that with the other data.
Yeah, we are in the process of doing that. Getting that data is really difficult, and maybe people will have better ways of doing it, but my daughter is actually in the process of pulling you have to have a permit to pollute, so she's in the process of pulling every single permit to pollute, and then digitizing that and putting it into shape files, which are the mapping outline files, so that we can get a finer, kind of like more granular look at this. Again, my daughter is the one who really likes the pretty map. I'm actually the statistician, and so I like those smokestacks and I like that, but it's really hard then to enter like that into the kind of analyses I do. I mean, they're both valuable, but for what you're interested in, what she's doing and what Juan Sue M., some people may know him, he does a lot of environmental mapping, and he's developing a program called MapWork that allows you to do that real quick, what it's taking us a long time to do.
Well, I know that working in Georgia and South Carolina, for example, and North Carolina and Alabama, that, you know, there are communities that I go to where you can see on one side an incinerator, on this side a chemical plant, and like 3 or 4 sometimes from standing in one place. And so there's a real concentration of those kinds of things in certain communities, and we know where they are.
And what would be nice to be able to do would be to actually to get that kind of longitudinal what, you know, like what in what area. For that, it's difficult though, because you've got a smokestack, and here is something that I think that you're going to talk about later. You have a smokestack, and you have a chemical plant. Well, North Carolina and South Carolina might not be so bad if you've got ocean breezes that are getting that out of there, okay? Because with ambient air pollution, it depends on, you know, the wind patterns as well as just what's being emitted. So you have to model in, you know, weather patterns as well. That's why Knoxville, where we are now, is such a bad place to live, because we're a bowl. And so what you see going up in the air in the smokestack is not going anywhere. And I think Birmingham is the same way. Okay, did I answer? Is like, that's something that really needs to happen. But that's not, unfortunately, that's not my part of the project.
Right. What we've seen is the biggest contributor to pollution in a given area are the smokestacks, which are the nearest in distance.
And so my kind of takeaway message is that smokestacks are randomly located across the social geography. These smokestacks are located in places that are poor, particularly in places that are poor and predominantly African American. Okay?
Well,
Yeah.
and if you don't stay for our second session, where we're going to talk a little bit about that, please let's talk for a few minutes before you leave today.
Okay, so a project that I'm not allowed to, let me go back up to the one that a project I wasn't allowed to talk about today because it's going to be presented at the APHA is the lung cancer project. So I can show you the all cancer project where we're looking at the distribution of all cancer. And again, here we are for white males. I'm showing it only for males because our data is actually a little better for males. And where are we? We're right here. We're in the center of the bullseye for cancer mortality. And again, I want to kind of highlight that lung cancer is driving that bus, even though I'm not showing you lung cancer, but lung cancer is driving that bus. I want you to note that for African Americans, it's located in a slightly different place. It's located in the Mississippi Delta, and the part that I'm particularly interested in my own research, you can tell I'm a researcher, is really this kind of arc in Arkansas, because if I could drill down and I could show you the distribution, the hotspot map, and take all the United States except for the southeast out of there, and then look again for hotspots within the southern distribution, this area in Arkansas right there would be the area that would really pop out at you. And so we are talking, and the woman I was talking to, we have hypotheses about what might be going on. It could be rice farming. It could be furniture making. Lane Furniture has its biggest plant in Arkansas in one of those counties.
What?
Oh, Lane Furniture. So, and the varnish that's used in furniture finishing is a known, contributor to lung cancer. Yes.
Do you have this correlated with smoking and chewing
Yes.
tobacco use?
Yes.
And how does that alter your map?
Yes, I do, but I can't show it today because it's going to be shown in 2 weeks at the APHA in Boston. And my boss, when I was getting ready to go, he goes, "You can't show those slides, you can't show those slides." So I don't quite get it. I collected the data and now my daughter was happy.
Civil disobedience.
Well, yeah, he was just really excited about that. But I want you to know that, that I have control for smoking. I have control for, poverty. And I've actually, I'm trying to develop a more comprehensive kind of measure of economic deprivation rather than just poverty. Those are things that are on my desk right now that I'm working on. And so what else do you think that I should control for besides smoking? Smoking and poverty are really correlated with each other. Smoking and race are, if African American is the 1 and everybody else is 0, is negatively correlated. African Americans are much less likely to smoke than whites.
Moonshine whiskey.
I'm sorry, say that again.
African Americans are less likely to smoke tobacco than whites.
You gotta correlate for moonshine whiskey also.
Yeah, no, I don't know where you going to get me that data?
There is some out there, and certainly there's data on Calvados in northern France that would fit this also.
Lynn, do you have a timing issue?
No, question.
Okay, I might have a timing issue.
Okay.
Let's take Lynette's question and then move on.
Oh, well, I'm just wondering, like, judging by the hotspot, how much does that have to do with Monsanto's headquarters?
I have not put Monsanto in there, but one of the things that, certainly, maybe Monsanto, when I'm looking at this, what I really want, I might want to look at Monsanto, but what I really want to look at next in terms of where I am in my project, and this isn't, hopefully this project is ongoing for the next 6 years. What I would like to look at crop overlays. Because I think that if you look here, we're going down the Mississippi Delta. If you've ever driven this, it's largely agricultural. And so, in fact, Tyler Skelton, who I probably should have put on this, is in the process of Monday, we're meeting so that we can merge the crop overlay data onto this. And back to, my real goal here is to create this database that you can log into, a data portal, and you can pull out that crop overlay data, and you can pull out whatever disease outcome you want, and you can look at it and analyze it yourself. Yes?
How much of the impact that you have there would be attributed to poor medical care?
I have modeled that, and actually, surprisingly little.
Really?
Surprisingly little. One of the, I have to quit, he's going to make me quit. I have much better, just maps, you just have to look here. I can share the cardiovascular disease for whites. I can share the cardiovascular disease for blacks. And
It's kind of surprising, isn't it?
after this, I can share almost anything in my Dropbox. So what I really want to do is the limitation is something, if you went to earlier sessions, that you're all going to hear about, is that I have not been able to establish the smoking gun. I can show that there's a connection between these things, but I cannot establish in ecological cross-sectional data that there's a causal relationship. So my next research project is I want to develop a cohort and either start collecting, and the lawyers in here need to work with scientists that are doing this and collecting biomarkers. Because just because you live somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you work there. So you need to get biomarkers and try to determine if it's place of work or place of home. So that's the thing that I want to do, and he says, there you go, if you want more information.
Well, also, Barb will be part of our discussion of data and toxic impact on things like lung cancer, et cetera, and cardiovascular disease. And the next session starts in 15 minutes.
And I am primarily a methodologist, and you may have gotten that. I'm interested in the substantive stuff, but I'm interested in designing studies so that we can actually prove causality.
All right. We're going to talk real fast. I'm not going to talk much about, given the time, the green jobs and energy reduction, energy waste reduction, and the impact that can have on low-income communities in terms of their available spending money as well as the green jobs that might come from it. We'll talk a lot in the next section about toxic release data in inner city Nashville. And I'll leave open for questions the Mayan villages around Felipe Carrillo Puerto if we run out of time. Let me invite Ramesh to take this spot. Ramesh is a colleague who is working on the project, which is the core of the next session. But I also wanted Ramesh to say a few words about his perspective, because we can be very American-centered. And in fact, I think it's important. One of the really phenomenal things that's both a crisis and an opportunity is the realization that environmental justice causes us to rethink who we are in America, what we're doing, the way we live our lives, and its impact on other countries. And sort of the justice issue that we can't necessarily tell China, well, you've been underdeveloped for all this time and we've taken advantage of it, but now we'd like you to make sacrifices because it's time to protect the world. And by the way, we got ours, so it's a shame, but you're not going to get yours. So Ramesh, could you just sort of spend a few minutes talking about that, and then I'd like to invite Kirthana and Kavya up. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep, 1 minute, maybe two.
Yeah, no, thank you. How many of you have traveled outside the U.S.? Like the third world, India, Brazil, China, countries like that. I think I'll give you one classic example. I travel quite a bit. I'm there in India for a month and a month here. And when I go there, by the time I come back home, like let's say for example, I go to work in the morning at about 11 o'clock and come back at about 5 o'clock in the evening and wash my face. The water is black. You don't need all these numbers, yeah, and
Math is on your face.
yes, the math is on the face, and it is really, really bad, and you'll be surprised. And the first time I had this black water coming out of my mouth, I was like, shoot. That's a perfect example, and getting to the numbers, the impact is much bigger than what people see in the third world. Today, I think in India alone, by 2015, 40% of the country will be diabetic.
Will be what?
Will be diabetic.
Oh, diabetic.
Yes. So that means almost every adult has to have insulin in his body. It is a direct impact of pollution. And 20 years ago, when I grew up in India, things were not. Today, jobs are there, people are rich, but there's no help. I think to some extent, I should not blame any of the Western world who gave the jobs, but the money that came in, it automatically brought in the Western culture, the Western habits, and it's just an example. I don't know. I can take questions. I can talk about a lot about what is going on in the third world.
And Ramesh will also be part of the next session.
Yeah.
Anyone want to? Okay. Go ahead.
Do you also see an increased rate of cardiovascular disease, heart disease in India more than the United States?
It is there, but I don't think it is because of the pollution. It might be because the rains are actually naturally thinner for the Indian population compared to the Caucasians here. So that is actually a bigger factor why there's more cardiovascular disease in India. But I think I see more impact on women, in all honesty. A lot of people in the current generation, they're not fertile enough to have kids.
Right.
That's the biggest. And I have 120 employees working for me in India, and whenever I talk to the small women, they're sick most of the time.
Ramesh, what kind of numbers do we have on China? Because one of the things that I saw specifically, even in comparison to the time that I spent in India and the time that I spent in China specifically, inland is far greater its pollution levels as opposed to around the rim, whether it's Hong Kong, Shanghai. Is there any accurate numbers as far as cardiovascular disease, as far as neurological or neuropathy that is directly related to pollution? Is that information available?
I doubt there are any number, the problem is there's no data
Right.
in all these countries. And there is no direct data that correlates the diseases and the pollution. The only data, as I said, is it's on your face.
Right. Because
There's a real problem with data in a lot of developing countries, like Sherry's working on a book with some folks in India, and they've got great theoretical analysis, but all the data they're quoting is data on US population.
what really caught me is I spent about 4 days in Shanghai, and the pollution was just absolutely insane. And the pictures that you see where you see outside of a window in a skyscraper, that doesn't exist.
Yes.
And what was interesting is I was caught in the rain, and when I got back into my hotel room, took my clothes off and kind of rinsed them off, it was the color of your suit, was the water that was coming out of my clothing. So I have to believe that there has to be something that's contributing, or there has to be a huge number.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wear a white shirt in India, China, because
Yeah.
it's black by the time it's black.
I learned that the hard way. In our last 2 minutes, we're going to hear from two youth. Christina, come on up, please. And then in the last minute, Kavya. Christina?
Outdoor air pollution is one of the causes of asthma. Outdoor air pollution comes mostly from natural resources and burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gases. Primary pollutants enter directly into the troposphere, such as soot or carbon monoxide. Secondary pollutants form when primary pollutants interact with one another or with the air to form new pollutants. Recent studies support an important role for air pollutants in the asthma pathogenesis. In the Children's Health Study by Dr. Frank Milligan, children who played more than 3 team sports, which is a marker for high outdoor ventilation rates, had more than 3-fold increased risk if they resided in communities with the highest average ozone levels. Children living within 75 meters of a major road with elevated estimated levels of traffic-related pollution show an increased risk of asthma. Residents within 75 meters of a major road was associated with a 1.5-fold increased risk of lifetime asthma wheezing.
Okay. And lastly, let's give this to Kavya. Kavya, you wanted to share something.
What is asthma? Asthma is a disease in your lungs. You will have a hard time breathing if you have asthma. In the U.S., over 18.7 million adults and 7 million kids have asthma. Reasons that cause asthma are allergies, cold, cough, and pollution in the air. My story. I have asthma. I got asthma because of my allergies. If I get near a dog or pet it or hold it, I get asthma. It's really sad because I love dogs. When I get asthma, my breathing starts getting harder to breathe. So I use an inhaler to get my breathing back to normal. I told you about my asthma. Now will you help prevent kids from getting asthma?
The 2011 study labeled 4 of the 10 worst cities in America in terms of environments that provoke the emergence of asthma in people as well as asthma attacks are Memphis, Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Nashville. So please join us in the next session if you can to hear more. Thank you, everybody.